Alright, today I'm going to be showing you guys exactly how we create the jewelry after the designing. So this is going to be like a step 2, well, I guess step 3. So we're going to design it first, 3D print it, and then this is every step after that. So the first stage is going to be the investment. And so what that is basically it's a plaster-like substance, and that is going to create the mold around the 3D printed piece, which I'll be showing a little bit more in a second, but this is what the investment looks like. Again, it basically looks exactly like plaster mix. It is a very, very fine powder. It's super, super fine so that you can get all of the details, but the one that I'm using is R&R Ultra Vest. Okay, so the first step of the process after I have 3D printed the design is to sprue the design. So this is basically going to be where the metal flows from when you're pouring. And so I have a very simple setup here. I actually just use a soldering iron to basically weld the wax to the 3D printed wax pattern. So super simple, it's just a temperature controlled soldering iron. So I actually just have it set to its lowest setting, which is 187 degrees Celsius. So hotter than I need it to be, but it works, and I already had the soldering iron, so I'm just gonna keep using that. So the design that I'm going to be spruing up today is going to be the Oni Demon. This one actually has a horn broken off, but I'm gonna cast it anyways just to see what the best way to sprue this piece is going to be, because basically it has what you want to do is sprue it to the heaviest piece of the design of the 3D print. But on this, it is going to be a little difficult because you can see I was going to sprue it here, but if I sprue it here, there's a horn that goes up the other way, so the metal can't flow backwards. When I sprue this, I'm going to have to actually put another tiny rod of wax to this horn so that the metal actually flows there. So I'm going to sprue this the best I can. This is kind of a complicated design for me, at least. I guarantee that if you were to watch another jeweler do this, someone that's been doing this a lot longer than I have, which hasn't been a super long time, they're going to do it a lot differently. So this is a huge learning experience for me, is testing to see what works best. So like I said, I guarantee someone might do it differently, but I just need to test for myself. So I am using the R&R Ultra Vest. I actually meant to get the Plasticast, but for whatever reason I did not look at my cart and I accidentally ordered the Ultra Vest, but it has worked fine. And honestly, I don't know huge differences between Ultra Vest and Plasticast, but I'm actually going to be getting the X Vest from Bluecast, just because it's from the same company that I get my resin from, which I'll talk about later, but it's very, very good resin, and I trust that company, so I'm going to be using the X Vest from when I run out of this forward. But that's what I use for now, and it works great still. Alright, so the next step in the casting process is actually mixing the investment. So this is what the mold is created out of using that 3D print, and that's also what I pour the metal into. Another note is definitely use a respirator when you are working with investment mix, both when you're mixing it and actually just measuring it out, because it has very, very fine particles, like I said, and those can travel into your lungs and cause a lot of issues. So if you're watching this video, please wear a respirator if you're doing anything like this with investment mix. Alright, so I'm using a ratio of 38 to 100, which means I will be using about 285 grams of water. Also, I recommend using distilled water, but I don't have any right now, so I'm just using bottled water. Since this is gypsum bonded, I'm going to be using boric acid, about 1%, adding that to the mix. That just helps it harden. So once I mix this, it hardens pretty quickly, so I'm going to be pouring it into here. So those are the designs. with the flasks over them. Once I mix that, I'm gonna be pouring them into there. And this is hooked up to my vacuum chamber. So once I put this lid on, I'm gonna suck the bubbles out. Otherwise that'll cause some defects and it might crack the mold, stuff like that. But I don't have a whole lot of time, so I have to do it pretty quickly. So now that we've poured the investment, what we're gonna do is degas. So what happens if you don't degas is you'll get all of these little bubbles here that show up in your print. So those were air bubbles, and since this one wasn't degassed good enough, basically I should have shaken the chamber quite a bit more than I did, but I got all of these air bubbles that showed up in the actual cast, and it would have been a pretty good cast if I would have done that. So the kiln we're using for the burnout process is the Paragon SC2. There's not really much to say about this kiln other than it works really well. If you watch some of our previous videos, we were using a lot of handmade equipment, some of like the very beginning videos that I was making. So we've upgraded quite a bit. So here's the rest of our setup. I'm using a homemade vacuum table, which is why it looks really dinky, but it works actually really well for, at least compared to how it looks. So I actually used this vacuum pump for the degassing chamber as well, which is what we use to suck the bubbles out of the investment mix. The vacuum table is what we use to suck the metal into the mold. So I just use the same vacuum pump. And then the melting furnace I actually got off of Amazon, and it seems to work really well. I have to replace the crucible every so often. It does take a while to get up to temperature, but I'm okay with the waiting. So once the investment is hardened, this is going to basically fit a seal, a homemade seal, which is why it looks like shit. So it's gonna hold a seal here. The design that was in there is now melted out, and then it's going to go over my homemade vacuum table. So I just have another flask here, and it's going to suck metal from the bottom. So the reason that there's holes in here is so that the vacuum isn't just pulling from the bottom, it's pulling from all directions. So it sucks the metal in a lot more efficiently, and it'll get a lot more of the detail in there too. lastly, for the pickling and tumbling, I'll actually use this, which is just a Chinese knockoff brand of real tumbler. The only complaint that I have about this equipment is this seal breaks very easily, or it starts to wear out over time very easily. So it actually cracked down here, the frame cracked here, so I'm assuming I could just buy another one and it'll work fine again, but this didn't last me that long. And then for the polishing, I actually use the PowerTech from Amazon. It's just a bench buffer. I have these wheels on it, and this actually works super well. I did get the first one that I got from them. It was actually defective, but they replaced it very quickly, so I'm still pretty happy with this. So another thing I use for polishing and finishing is actually also this Dremel. So a lot of people use jeweler's Dremels, which are a little bit different, but this one actually works just fine. I don't know how to pronounce the brand name on there, but it actually works really good.